straight away we begin with a look at some of the news making the headlines, where we start with Cairo said it is committed to protecting African stability and security in separate meetings on the sidelines of the Tokyo International Conference on African Development, TICAD. Since 1993, Japan has been leading the TICAD conference to promote African development, organized by the United Nations and the United Nations Development Programme, the UNDP, as well as the World Bank and the African Union Commission. We have more details in this story.
Cairo expressed commitment to protecting African stability and security in separate meetings on the sidelines of the Tokyo International Conference on African Development, TICAD. In a meeting, Abdul-Ati and Nigerian Foreign Minister Yusuf Maitama Togar exchanged views on enhancing regional security and addressing the ongoing crisis in Sudan, which has been embroiled in a civil war since April 2023. Both sides expressed their desire to deepen cooperation across key sectors and reinforce Africa's peace and security infrastructure, with Egypt reaffirming its commitment to the continent's stability and prosperity. The meeting also covered key regional and international issues, including security challenges in the Sahel region and West Africa. Furthermore, Abdul-Ati and Togar discussed means to enhance bilateral cooperation, particularly in economic, commercial and investment sectors, in addition to promoting private sector involvement. In a separate meeting with his Chadian counterpart, Abdurrahmane Goalama Allah, Abdul-Ati emphasized Egypt's commitment to strengthening ties with Chad. He also stressed that Chad's security is crucial to regional stability. Their meeting also addressed the Sudan crisis, focusing on its direct impact on both nations due to their proximity and the significant humanitarian burden of hosting Sudanese refugees. They also underscored the critical link between their national security and the stability of Sudan, urging intensified coordination to resolve the crisis. They accordingly agreed to prioritize opening crossings, establishing safe corridors for humanitarian aid in Sudan, and ensuring secure access for workers, urging international donors to fulfill their commitments. Abdul-Ati also met with several other African counterparts from Senegal, Togo, Benin, Somalia, the Democratic Republic of the Congo, Central African Republic, Comoros, Sierra Leone and Ivory Coast.
Welcome back, ladies and gentlemen. We're now delighted to be joined over the telephone by our guest for the afternoon, His Excellency Ambassador Gamal Bayoumi, the former Assistant Foreign Minister. It's a very good afternoon to you, Mr. Ambassador. Good afternoon, Mr. Ambassador.
Hello.
Hello, Mr. Ambassador. Good afternoon to you, sir. Can you hear us, Mr. Ambassador? Right, apologies. We have a technical problem with our phone call. We move to another news item, and hopefully we'll get His Excellency back on the line. We move to a dam in Sudan's eastern Red Sea state that collapsed and sent water flooding over nearby homes, killing at least 4 people. The country's health ministry reported the incident, whilst media reports said scores of people were still missing. We have more details in this report.
In a statement, Sudan's health ministry said that the Arbaa Dam had collapsed and that resources had been deployed to the area to help the people who had been stranded. The statement said at least 4 people had died in the floodwaters, but did not give an estimate of how many were missing. However, a local official told the Sudanese news site At-Taghir that he believed there to be at least 60 dead. Amr Isa Taher, the headwater resources official for the Red Sea state, said the damage was extensive. The Sudanese news outlet Medamaik, citing the country's air force, reported more than 100 people were missing and that many other villagers had climbed to rocky hilltops to avoid the rising waters. The dam, in a remote area 40 kilometers north of Port Sudan, supplied drinking water to the Red Sea city. Many of the country's top officials and civilians have fled to Port Sudan from the capital Khartoum since a brutal conflict broke out in the country in April 2023. The war pitting the country's military against the paramilitary rapid support forces has thrown Sudan into a humanitarian crisis. Most recently, a cholera outbreak fueled by flooding and poor sanitation facilities has killed at least 24 people. The WHO said an initial cholera vaccination campaign in Kassala in eastern Sudan has reached more than 50,000 people. It said more than 450,000 additional doses of oral cholera vaccine are in the pipeline to be delivered. The seasonal floods have washed away critical infrastructure, compounding the country's crisis. More than 130 people died over the past 2 months in floods that have inundated large places across the country, with more than 23,000 houses collapsed or damaged.
Still with more news, Mali's army said Monday it had destroyed terrorist targets and killed around 20 armed individuals during an operation in the north a day earlier. We have the details.
Mali's army said Monday it had destroyed terrorist targets and killed around 20 armed individuals during an operation in the north a day earlier, which local sources said left at least 20 dead. According to separatist rebels, a local elected representative and an official from a local NGO, drone strikes on Sunday in Tinzouatini near the Algerian border killed around 20 civilians, including several children. Tinzouatini was the site of a major late July battle in which mainly Tuareg-led separatists and fighters claimed to have inflicted a serious defeat on the Malian army and the Russian paramilitary group Wagner. Speaking of Sunday's events, the Malian army said in a statement that an offensive reconnaissance mission spotted and identified pickup vehicles loaded with war material carefully guarded in the courtyard of a plot of land in Tinzouatini. Separatist rebels claim to have killed dozens of Malian soldiers and members of the Wagner paramilitary group during fighting in Tinzouatini between July 25 and 27. The Malian army and Wagner acknowledged heavy losses but gave no precise figures. Since seizing power in a 2020 coup, Mali's military leaders have made it a priority to retake all of the country from separatists linked to Al-Qaeda and the Daesh group.
Right, welcome back. Ladies and gentlemen, we're now delighted to be joined over the telephone by our guest for the afternoon, His Excellency Ambassador Gamal Bayoumi, the former Assistant Foreign Minister. It's a very good afternoon to you, Mr. Ambassador.
Good afternoon, how are you?
Fine, thank you, sir, and thank you very much for your time, Mr. Ambassador. Let me start by asking you about how would you describe the level of cooperation and relations between Japan and the African continent as a whole?
It is a newly success story because Egypt and the African countries were calling several times lately in Sharm el-Sheikh on the developed countries to come and invest in Africa with our experience and with the possibilities in Africa. And the problem that Africa, which is the poorest continent in the world, the flow of money and capital going from Africa to the developed world is much more than it receives, because Africa is paying its debts, it's paying its invoice of imports more than it gets as investment or as a result of its exports. So this cannot continue because Africa is not that rich. So Egypt and other countries in Sharm el-Sheikh called on countries who can come and invest in Africa to seize the opportunity. And it's not that easy. Africa has its problems also.
Yes.
It has many problems, bureaucracy among them, bad communication, bad banking system, and many things must be dealt with in Africa before we ask for more and more finance. But the success story is coming from China and Japan now. They started to invest in Africa on a small size projects, and we hope that this will continue, because a small story of success, it would lead to a bigger experience. So we are happy as Egyptian and as African that this process is going ahead successfully.
Absolutely, Your Excellency. Now, why do you see Japan over the last few years giving quite a lot of weight and attention to taking part in some of the development projects, specifically in Africa?
This is one duty which is the developed countries declare that they are owe the developing countries to do. So we asked in Tokyo in 1972. There was a conference there, and we asked the whole world, the rich world, to spend 2% of their national income to invest in Africa and in the developing countries. This has never been realized, except from countries like Sweden or the North European countries, and some countries in the Arab world like Saudi Arabia or Emirates. No country in the world is covering this goal. So anyway, the secret is, one European ambassador told me when I was in Africa, that you spend a lot of energy, a lot of duties in Africa, and the result is not that big. And he told me that what he can do in a country in Europe in one day, he cannot realize in Africa in 1 year. So I appreciate very much that China and Japan are giving this file their support. So, and it's our duty to encourage them by facilitating their work. And I hope this will continue and will be expanded more and more.
Absolutely, Your Excellency. Now, this conference that was recently held was discussing health, education, trade, and investment opportunities as well. How would you describe Africa's need for cooperation in these specific fields?
Very important, and it's not one direction. We have to try on the bilateral level, on the regional level, and we succeeded also to establish the whole Africa Free Trade Area now, instead of several free trade areas in the west and east and the south. Now we combine all these subcontinent free trade areas in one big free trade area of Africa, 51 countries. And I hope this will bring more and more trade and investment and more relations. And Egypt is benefiting from that. Our trade with Africa is increased. And if we continue like that, I hope that this will make every party and every country benefit from this process.
Absolutely, Your Excellency. Now, in the meeting that was recently held, the TCAD meeting, we saw the Egyptian Foreign Minister, Abdel Ati, emphasizing the necessity to discuss strategies to tackle some of the current risks and threats to peace and security, which is a challenge really in the African continent. Why are we not seeing international heavyweights, for example, changing strategies to achieve peace and security? And how can such conferences work towards this, in your opinion, Mr. Ambassador?
This is one challenging file also, because Africa needs security, whether security in the relation between one country and another, and the security in the same country. The civil war in many African countries is stopping the efforts for development. See what is happening in Sudan, what's happening in Somalia, in many African countries, and we are trying to help the people of every country to come under one flag and one united country under democracy, in order to have much better relations among the citizens of the same country. Egypt is doing its best, and we are really benefiting from this. And I hope that the security matter also will be highly treated and taken care by all the African countries and the superpowers also. This will help Africa in order to be a peaceful area, because investment cannot go to areas where wars are there. War is not a good environment for investment at all, whether it is between two countries or inside the same country from different tribes and sections.
Indeed. Also addressing the event, Abdulati said Cairo, thinks these prolonged conflicts in Sudan, for example, and Gaza, have revealed to a certain degree the international community's unwillingness or maybe failure to intervene effectively in the continent. How do you read this statement, Your Excellency?
It's very important, and I know quite well that our Minister Abdulati knows exactly all the details, because he's an old diplomat. He knows all the files he should deal with, and of course we are keen to solve many files, whether on the international level and the regional level. But what is a close problem to us is two problems: the immediate border with Gaza, because it is immediately our neighbor, and Sudan, which was one day in my generation, we used to have Sudan as Egypt and Sudan as one country. And now we are hosting more than 5 million Sudanese, and since the new problem, we are hosting 500,000 in addition.
Yes.
So this is not a joke, and Sudan is very important to us, because it is part of us. It is we consider Sudanese as Egyptian and vice versa.
Yes.
And for the River Nile cooperation also, because Sudan for us is the source of the River Nile, whether the White Nile or the Blue Nile.
Indeed, Your Excellency. Now, this is the 9th edition of this conference. How do you see the previous conferences having succeeded in meeting some of, the goals that they set in their agendas?
Frankly, I see that they are making development, and they gaining much more experience. By the way, a few years ago, our President Fattah al-Sisi attended one of these conferences in Tokyo, and he went that time to Tokyo twice in 2 months to attend the TICAD and to attend the G7 group. And in between, he went to Paris. So we have a very active diplomacy, which is keen to make good relations with all the partners. Mind you that we have several visits from prime ministers of Japan, and we have a famous street in Heliopolis named after Shinzo Abe, the prime minister of Japan. And when he came to us, he gave us a lecture showing us some pictures of the first delegation coming from Japan to see the industrial development in Egypt in order to establish this sort of cooperation. So the relation is very old and very strong.
Absolutely. Now, Mr. Ambassador, compared to other levels of cooperation, for example, like cooperation between African countries and Europe or the US or Latin America, how do you weigh the level of Asian African cooperation in light of the changes that we're seeing all around the world and some of the challenges as well?
We have witnessed in the 60s the African-Asian cooperation.
Yes.
And that was during the time of Gamal Abdel Nasser, Nkrumah, and Nehru in India. So the cooperation between Asia and Africa is very important. We gave it all it needs. And now we have an eminent society called the Asian African Society, which is doing it's best to advocate for the relation between Africa and Asia. But both continents are not the richest ones in the world. Of course, we have Europe and America, North America are the richest continents in the world, and we hope that they will help Asia and Africa in order to absorb more and more investment and to be involved in more and more trade, whether exporting or importing.
Indeed. Your Excellency, now you mentioned the issue of the African Continental Free Trade Agreement. How do you see the establishment of such an agreement impacting ties, with world economic blocs as a whole?
As a matter of fact, the inter-Africa relation is getting better. I mentioned here that the Egyptian exports to Africa increased by 3 times in the last 10 years, and this is good by itself. Although the volume itself is not that big, because our main trade partner is Europe and Arab countries, but this is one good step towards more and more strong relations between the inter-Africa relations. And Egypt, as I said, benefiting from that, and we are a source of a leading country to advocate all these efforts in order to have much better and much wide relation between the Africans, not only in trade and investment, but I am talking about education. I want to mention here that tens of thousands of students from Africa are studying in Egypt, especially in Al-Azhar al-Sharif, where they are benefiting from scholarships granted by Al-Azhar. So, and you have the city of the Africa Envoys to Al-Azhar. Tens of thousands of students are staying there on the account of Al-Azhar. So we are doing this also on the culture and the education dimension.
Point, absolutely. And finally, Your Excellency, what kind of fields of development specifically in Africa would you think would benefit the most from some of the Japanese expertise, whether it's in services or education or health, etc.?
Yes, if I choose as a priority, I go immediately to agriculture.
Okay.
And we can have a sort of coordination between the needs of a country like Egypt and the surplus land in countries like Sudan or Nigeria or Cameroon. I tried myself when I was ambassador in Cameroon, because they have a surplus of land, they do not cultivate it at all. So the trick is to bring Egyptian experience and finance in order to plant our needs of cereals and wheat without any problem there, and they have no water problem. So we can match ourselves to this situation. Also, small industry like the canned food, and the Prime Minister of Cameroon phoned me saying that I am not thanking you because you gave me a sort of a gift of Egyptian canned food, but I am congratulating you. Come and teach us how to reserve our wealth of fruits and vegetables by making this small industry of canned food, and we can do that all over the continent.
Absolutely right. I'd like to thank you very, very much, Your Excellency Ambassador Gamal Bayoumi, the former Assistant Foreign Minister. Thank you, sir, for your time and all your insight and for joining us this afternoon. With that, ladies and gentlemen, we wrap up today's edition of Africa Today. I'm Angie Meher. Thank you for watching.